The teacup trembled in my hands as I stood frozen behind the kitchen door, the delicate porcelain threatening to shatter against the hardwood floor. My son's voice carried through the thin barrier between us, each word a knife twisting deeper into my chest. "My mother? I can't keep carrying her. She's a burden," Kevin said with a grin I couldn't see but could hear in his voice. That casual cruelty that had become as familiar as his morning coffee ritual. His wife Louise giggled, a sound like breaking glass. "Maybe it's time for assisted living, honey. Think of all the space we'd have." The teacup did fall then, shattering against the kitchen tiles with a sound that seemed to echo through my 63 years of life. But they didn't hear it over their laughter, their casual dissection of my worth reduced to square footage and monthly expenses. I had been Abigail Maloney for 37 years of marriage, and Abigail Maloney for the 4 years since Harold's death. I had been Kevin's mother for 42 years, had carried him for 9 months, nursed him through fevers, celebrated his graduations, danced at his wedding. I had been many things, but never, never had I been a burden. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the mess of broken porcelain at my feet. Each shard caught the light like tiny mirrors, reflecting fragments of my life back at me. I knelt carefully, my arthritis protesting, and began collecting the pieces. One cut my finger, and I watched the blood pool on the white ceramic, thinking how fitting it was that I should bleed on the remnants of something that had once held warmth. "Did you hear something?" Louise's voice drifted from the living room. "Just the old house settling," Kevin replied dismissively. "Like I was saying, we could convert her room into a home office. God knows I need the space now that the firm's expanding." I rose slowly, cradling the broken pieces in my palm. The cut on my finger had already stopped bleeding, but something inside me had broken open that would take much longer to heal. I moved through the kitchen with the careful steps of someone who had learned to make herself small, invisible, unburdensome. This had been my kitchen once. Harold and I had chosen every cabinet, every countertop, every appliance with the careful deliberation of people building a life together. We had planned to grow old here, to watch grandchildren learn to walk across these same hardwood floors. But Harold had other plans, apparently, leaving me at 59 with a mortgage, a broken heart, and a son who saw my grief as an opportunity for real estate acquisition. "Mom would never agree to selling," Kevin continued, his voice taking on that wheedling tone he'd perfected as a child. "She's too attached to this place, but assisted living, we could present it as what's best for her. Better care, social activities, people her own age. People her own age. As if I were some ancient relic who needed to be filed away with others of my vintage. Like books in a library no one visited anymore. I had moved in with Kevin and Louise 6 months ago, after the doctor had found me unconscious in the garden. A mild heart episode, he'd called it, brought on by stress and isolation. Kevin had insisted I couldn't live alone anymore, had painted himself as the devoted son sacrificing his privacy for his mother's well-being. The local newspaper had even run a small piece about it. Local attorney opens home to widowed mother, complete with a photo of Kevin's practiced smile and Louise's fake warmth. What they hadn't mentioned was how I'd signed over my Social Security checks to help with household expenses, how I'd liquidated Harold's life insurance to pay for Kevin's office renovation, how I'd gradually become the live-in babysitter for their twin daughters while Louise pursued her real estate license, and Kevin worked late into the night on cases that always seemed to require expensive dinners and weekend golf tournaments. "She's got that safe deposit box at First National," Louise was saying now, her voice taking on that calculating edge I'd learned to recognize. "And Harold's pension is still coming in. It's not like she'd be destitute. The pension stops when she dies," Kevin replied matter-of-factly. "But you're right about the safe deposit box. She's never said what's in it." I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. The safe deposit box. They didn't know about the other things. The accounts Harold had set up, the investments he'd made, the careful provisions he'd insisted on despite my protests that we'd never need them. "We're not monsters," Kevin continued, his voice taking on that self-justifying tone that meant he was trying to convince himself as much as his wife. "We're thinking about what's best for everyone. She'd be happier with people her own age. and we'd have our lives back. Our lives back. As if my presence had somehow stolen their existence from them, rather than the other way around. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, its deep voice marking another hour in what had become a prison of false gratitude and forced smiles. I had been marking time since Harold's death, existing in the spaces between other people's lives, shrinking myself to fit into corners that grew smaller each day. But something had shifted in those moments behind the kitchen door. Some tectonic plate deep in my chest had moved, and I could feel the earthquake coming. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd once tended with such care. The roses Harold had planted for our 20th anniversary were blooming despite my absence, their deep red petals unfurling toward the sun with a defiance I envied. They didn't need permission to take up space, didn't apologize for their thorns or their beauty. Behind me, Kevin and Louise continued their casual demolition of my dignity, their voices a background hum to the symphony of rage building in my chest. They spoke of me as if I were already gone, as if the woman who had raised Kevin, who had loved him through his difficult teenage years, who had celebrated his victories and mourned his losses, had already been erased. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. I turned from the window and walked to the small desk where I kept my personal papers. My hands were steady now, purposeful. I pulled out my address book, an old-fashioned leather-bound thing that Kevin had often teased me about in better days, and flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. James Foster, my financial advisor. Harold's old friend who had helped us navigate the complexities of retirement planning, who had always treated me with the respect of an equal partner rather than a beneficiary. He'd told me more than once that I was financially independent, that I had choices. At the time, I'd nodded politely and tucked the information away, never imagining I'd need it, but I needed it now. I picked up the phone and dialed his number, my finger moving with the precision of muscle memory. It rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "James? It's Abigail Maloney. I need to see you today." "Abigail, of course. Is everything all right?" I looked toward the living room, where my son and his wife were still planning my exile with the casual efficiency of people disposing of unwanted furniture. "No," I said quietly, "but it's about to be." James Foster's office hadn't changed in the 4 years since Harold's death. The same mahogany desk dominated the space, the same leather-bound books lined the walls, and the same reassuring scent of coffee and paper filled the air. But I had changed. The woman who had sat in this chair 4 years ago, overwhelmed by grief and financial paperwork, was gone. In her place sat someone harder, more focused, with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. "Abigail," James said, settling into his chair across from me. At 72, he moved with the careful dignity of a man who had learned to make every gesture count. "You sounded urgent on the phone." "I need to know exactly what I have," I said without preamble. "Every account, every investment, every dollar Harold left me. And I need to know what's mine alone." James raised an eyebrow, but didn't question the sudden shift in my tone. He'd known Harold for 30 years, had watched us build our life together brick by brick. He understood that grief could hibernate for years before emerging as something else entirely. "Of course." He pulled out a thick folder, my folder, and opened it with practiced efficiency. "Let's start with the basics. Harold's pension, which you've been receiving, which stops when I die." "Yes, but that's not your only income." He spread several documents across the desk. "There's your own Social Security, the IRA rollovers, the municipal bonds Harold purchased in your name, and the investment account he set up specifically for your independence." I leaned forward, studying the numbers. "How much?" "Approximately $847,000 in liquid assets, plus the house in Millbrook, the one you owned before Harold's death. It's been rented out, but the tenant's lease expires next month." My breath caught. Harold had always handled the finances, insisting I didn't need to worry about such things. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning his decisions or demanding detailed explanations. Now I realized that trust had been a gift that extended far beyond his death. "The house in Millbrook? 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, garden in back. You and Harold bought it as a rental property 15 years ago. It's been generating $1,200 monthly, which has been automatically deposited into your Independence Fund, as Harold called it. Independence Fund. Even in death, Harold had been thinking of my freedom. And the money I've been giving Kevin for household expenses? James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's your Social Security, which you have every right to use as you see fit. But Abigail, you don't need to contribute to anyone's household expenses. You're financially independent. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Independent. I had been independent all along, had simply forgotten that independence was a muscle that atrophied without use. I need to access everything, I said. Close any joint accounts, ensure Kevin has no access to my funds, and arrange for the Millbrook house to be available immediately. Abigail, what's happened? I looked at this man who had been Harold's friend, who had watched me navigate widowhood with the patient kindness of someone who understood loss. He deserved honesty. My son thinks I'm a burden. He's planning to move me to assisted living so he can convert my room into a home office. The words tasted bitter, but saying them aloud stripped them of their power to wound. I heard him discussing it with his wife this morning. They were laughing. James's expression darkened. I see. I won't be discarded like worn-out furniture. I won't be filed away with other inconvenient elderly people so my son can expand his business. I raised him better than that, or I thought I did. What do you want to do? I want to disappear. Today. Before they come home from work and continue planning my exile. James nodded slowly. I can have the paperwork ready within 2 hours. Bank accounts, credit cards, everything transferred to your sole name. The Millbrook house? I'll need to contact the property management company, but I can expedite the process. And my belongings? Do you have much at Kevin's house? I considered this. When I'd moved in 6 months ago, I'd brought only essential items, leaving most of my possessions in storage. Kevin had insisted I wouldn't need much, that this was just a temporary arrangement until I got back on my feet. Now I realized he'd been planning this from the beginning, keeping me dependent, keeping me small, keeping me grateful. Just personal items, clothes, photos, a few pieces of jewelry. Pack light. We'll arrange for movers to collect your things from storage and deliver them to Millbrook. He leaned back in his chair. Abigail, are you certain about this? Once you make this move, there's no going back to how things were. Good, I said firmly. I don't want to go back. 2 hours later, I walked out of James's office with a new checkbook, new credit cards, and a set of keys to a house I'd forgotten I owned. The afternoon sun felt different on my face, warmer, more welcoming. I had money in my pocket, a roof over my head, and for the first time in months, I had choices. I drove to Kevin's house. I couldn't think of it as home anymore, and let myself in through the back door. The silence felt different now that I knew it was temporary. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, collecting the scattered pieces of my life with methodical efficiency. In the bedroom they'd graciously allowed me to use, I packed my clothes into 2 suitcases. The photos of Harold went into my purse, along with my mother's jewelry and the small wooden box containing Harold's letters from when we were courting. Everything else, the books, the decorative items, the accumulated debris of a life lived in other people's spaces, I left behind. In the kitchen, I wrote a note on the same paper I'd used for grocery lists and reminders. Kevin and Louise, I've decided to make other arrangements. Don't worry about being burdened by me any longer. I'll be in touch regarding my belongings. Mother, I left it on the counter next to the sugar bowl, where they'd be sure to find it. Then I walked to the utility room and made a phone call. City Electric? I need to disconnect service at 428 Maple Street, effective immediately. Yes, I'm the account holder. Abigail Maloney. The gas company was next, then the water department. With each call, I felt another thread connecting me to this place snap cleanly away. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being practical. If I was no longer living here, why should I pay for services I wasn't using? The joint checking account took longer to close, requiring a trip to the bank where I'd been a customer for 15 years. The teller, a young woman named Rosa, looked concerned as she processed the paperwork. Mrs. Maloney, this will leave the account with insufficient funds for the automatic payments scheduled for this month. That's correct, I said calmly. I'm closing my portion of the account. Mr. Kevin Carter will need to make other arrangements. By 4 o'clock, I was driving toward Millbrook with my suitcases in the back seat and a strange lightness in my chest. I hadn't felt this free since Harold's death, hadn't felt this much like myself in years. The house on Elm Street was smaller than I remembered, but it was mine. The key turned easily in the lock, and I stepped into a space that smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh paint. The property management company had maintained it well, and the departing tenants had left it clean and ready for occupancy. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The master bedroom faced east, ensuring morning sun. The kitchen was compact but functional, with a window overlooking the garden where Harold had planted fruit trees that were now mature and heavy with late summer apples. In the living room, I found a note from the previous tenants thanking me for being a considerate landlord and apologizing for the small stain on the carpet in the hallway. They'd left a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers on the mantelpiece, along with a list of local businesses and services. I opened the wine and poured myself a glass, then sat in the empty living room as the sun began to set. Somewhere across town, Kevin and Louise were probably discovering my note, were probably trying to call me. But I'd left my phone in the bedroom at their house, another thread severed. Tomorrow I would buy a new phone with a new number. I would purchase furniture and groceries and begin the business of living again. But tonight I sat in my own house, drinking wine and watching the shadows lengthen across floors that belonged to me. The grandfather clock I'd heard chiming the hours of my captivity was silent now, but I could feel time moving differently around me, not measured in moments of endurance, but in possibilities stretching ahead like an open road. I raised my glass to the empty room. "To independence," I said aloud, and my voice echoed back with a strength I'd almost forgotten I possessed. The phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. I knew because I'd been lying awake in my new bedroom, watching the morning light filter through curtains I'd forgotten I owned, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood waking up around me. The house phone, a landline the previous tenants had kept connected, began its insistent shrilling from the kitchen. I let it ring. By 7:30 it had rung 14 times. I counted each cycle, each desperate attempt to reach me, like a metronome marking the rhythm of Kevin's growing panic. When it finally stopped, the silence felt like victory. I made coffee in the small kitchen, using grounds I'd purchased the evening before during a quick trip to the grocery store. Everything felt different when you were spending your own money, making your own choices. The coffee tasted better. The morning air smelled cleaner. Even the simple act of choosing which mug to use felt like a small rebellion against the months of asking permission for everything. The phone rang again at 8:15. This time I answered. "Hello? Mother? Jesus Christ, where are you? We came home and found your note, and the power's out, and the water's been shut off." "Good morning, Kevin," I said calmly, stirring sugar into my coffee. "I trust you slept well?" What the hell is going on? Louise is hysterical. The girls are asking where Grandma went. You can't just disappear like this. I didn't disappear. I relocated. There's a difference. A pause. I could hear Louise's voice in the background, high-pitched and urgent. Good. Let her be hysterical. Let her realize that the free babysitting and household contributions had walked out the door with me. "Mother, whatever we did to upset you, we can talk about it. Come home. We'll figure this out. Home." The word felt foreign on his tongue, like he'd forgotten what it meant. "I am home, Kevin. For the first time in months, I'm actually home." "What are you talking about? You don't have anywhere to go. You can't afford— I can afford quite a bit, actually. Did you know your father left me very well provided for? I have a house, investments, income. I'm what you might call financially independent." The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. "You have a house?" "I have a house. The one on Elm Street in Millbrook. Your father bought it as a rental property years ago. It's been generating income this whole time. Income that's been accumulating in what Harold called my independence fund. You never asked. You were too busy calculating how much of my Social Security you needed to cover your mortgage." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, taking on the wheedling tone he'd used as a child when he wanted something. "Mother, I know you're upset. Maybe we moved too fast talking about assisted living. We can slow down, Take more time to consider your options. My options? I laughed, and it felt good to laugh at him instead of with him. Kevin, I heard you yesterday morning. You called me a burden. You and Louise were planning to discard me like I was broken furniture so you could expand your office. You were listening to a private conversation in my son's house where I was living as his guest. Or so I thought. Turns out I was paying rent without realizing it. That's not... The money you contributed was just what? My Social Security check that you needed to make your mortgage payment? My grocery money that somehow never quite covered groceries? My utility contributions for services I apparently shouldn't have been using? I could hear Louise's voice getting louder in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. Probably demanding to know how much money I actually had, calculating how much they'd lost when I walked out. Look, we made mistakes. We can fix this. Come home and we'll sit down and talk like adults. I am talking like an adult, Kevin. I'm talking like an adult who has choices and isn't dependent on your charity. I'm talking like an adult who pays her own bills and makes her own decisions. Mother, you're being unreasonable. You can't just cut us off like this. I can, actually. I've discovered I can do quite a lot of things I didn't think I could do. It's been very educational. The phone went quiet again, but I could hear whispering. They were conferring, probably trying to decide on a new strategy. I imagined Louise coaching Kevin on what to say, how to manipulate the situation back in their favor. The girls miss you, he said finally, playing what he obviously thought was his trump card. Emma asked where Grandma went. She's been crying. Emma, my granddaughter, 8 years old with Harold's eyes and my stubborn chin. The thought of her crying did twist something inside me, but I'd learned to recognize emotional manipulation when I heard it. Then bring her to visit. She's welcome anytime. You have my address. We don't actually... 428 Elm Street, Millbrook. It's about 20 minutes from your house. I'll be here. Mother, please. Let's meet somewhere neutral. Let's talk this through. We are talking it through. You're discovering that the burden you wanted to dispose of has removed herself from your life. Problem solved. You're our family. No, Kevin. I'm your mother. There's a difference. Family doesn't calculate each other's worth in terms of convenience and square footage. I could hear Louise's voice getting more insistent, and Kevin's responses becoming more frustrated. The conversation was clearly not going according to their plan. Fine, Kevin said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You want to be stubborn? You want to punish us? Go ahead. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you realize you can't manage on your own. I don't expect anything from you anymore, I said quietly. That's the most liberating thing I've learned in the last 24 hours. I hung up before he could respond. The kitchen felt peaceful after the phone call, filled with morning light and the distant sound of birdsong. I finished my coffee and walked outside to examine the garden. The apple trees were heavy with fruit, and the flower beds, though overgrown, showed signs of careful planning. Someone had loved this space once, had seen its potential, and worked to bring it to life. I knelt in the soft earth and began pulling weeds, my hands remembering the rhythm of gardening from the years before Harold's death. The work felt good, purposeful. Each weed I pulled was a small victory, a reclaiming of something that had been neglected but not destroyed. By noon, I had cleared 2 flower beds and filled a wheelbarrow with debris. My back ached pleasantly, and my hands were dirty in a way that felt honest. I was washing up at the kitchen sink when a car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched Kevin and Louise emerge from their BMW, their faces set with the determination of people who had come to retrieve something they believed belonged to them. Kevin wore his courtroom suit, the one that made him look older and more authoritative. Louise had chosen her most conservative outfit, probably thinking it would make her seem more sympathetic. They walked to the front door with the measured steps of people who had rehearsed this encounter. Kevin knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house. I dried my hands carefully, smoothed my hair, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I could see them standing stiffly on the porch, Louise clutching her purse like a shield, Kevin checking his watch as if my response time were being measured. I opened the door and stood in the doorway, not inviting them in. Kevin, Louise. I nodded to each of them with the polite coolness I might show to door-to-door salesmen. "Mother, we need to talk," Kevin said, his voice carrying the authority he used in court. "This has gone far enough." "Has it?" I remained in the doorway, my hand on the doorframe. "I was just thinking it was getting started." Louise stepped forward, her expression carefully arranged into what she probably thought was maternal concern. "Abigail, we're worried about you. This isn't like you." "You're right," I said. The old me would have apologized by now. The old me would have packed up my things and moved back in with you and pretended yesterday never happened. But I'm not her anymore. "You're being irrational," Kevin said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You're acting like a child." "I'm acting like someone who finally understands her worth. There's a difference." "Your worth?" Louise laughed, but it sounded forced. "Abigail, you're 63 years old. You can't just start over like some college graduate. You need family. You need support. I needed family when I was grieving Harold's death. I needed support when I was lost and frightened. What I got was exploitation disguised as charity." Kevin's face flushed red. "That's not fair. We opened our home to you. We took care of you. You took my money and gave me a room. You took my labor and called it family obligation. You took my independence and called it care." We never forced you to do anything," Louise said, her voice getting shrill. "You offered to help with expenses. You wanted to spend time with the girls." "I did want to spend time with the girls. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. You turned those needs into unpaid services." I could see the frustration building in both of them, the realization that their usual tactics weren't working. They had come here expecting to collect a wayward family member, not to negotiate with someone who had discovered she held all the cards. "What do you want?" Kevin asked finally. "Money? An apology? Tell us what it will take to fix this." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing Kevin's face. The boy I had raised, the young man I had been proud of, had been replaced by someone who calculated relationships in terms of cost and benefit. "I want you to leave my property," I said quietly. "I want you to go home and explain to your daughters that Grandma didn't abandon them. She just moved to her own house. And I want you to never, ever refer to me as a burden again." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Kevin opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. Louise's carefully composed expression cracked, showing the fury underneath. "Fine," Kevin said finally. "You want to be alone? You want to cut your family out of your life? Go ahead. But don't call us when you realize what you've thrown away." They turned and walked back to their car with the stiff dignity of people who had been dismissed. I watched them drive away, their BMW disappearing around the corner like a period at the end of a sentence. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the solid wood at my back. The house settled around me, quiet and welcoming. Outside, the apple trees rustled in the breeze, heavy with fruit that would ripen in its own time. For the first time in months, I was exactly where I wanted to be. 3 weeks passed in blessed silence. I settled into the rhythm of living alone with the ease of someone remembering a forgotten language. Each morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my own windows, made coffee in my own kitchen, and decided how to spend my own time. The house responded to my presence like a plant receiving water after a drought, revealing its character as I arranged furniture and hung pictures. I bought a small dining table and placed it near the kitchen window where I could watch the birds while I ate breakfast. I hung Harold's photograph on the mantelpiece, finally able to look at his face without the crushing weight of other people's expectations for my grief. I planted late-season flowers in the garden beds I'd cleared, their bright faces turned toward the autumn sun like small acts of defiance against the coming winter. But it was the silence that sustained me most. No one asking when dinner would be ready. No one calculating the cost of the electricity I used. No one treating my presence like a charitable tax deduction. The quiet was so profound, I sometimes found myself holding my breath, afraid to disturb it. On a Tuesday morning, as I was deadheading the chrysanthemums, I heard footsteps on the front walk. Through the garden gate, I saw a young woman approaching, early 30s, with Kevin's dark hair, but Harold's gentle eyes. It took me a moment to recognize Alexis, my stepdaughter from Harold's first marriage. I hadn't seen her since the funeral 4 years ago. She lived in Seattle, worked for some technology company, had always sent thoughtful birthday cards but kept our relationship politely distant. Harold had worried that his children from his first marriage felt displaced by our marriage, though I'd tried to include them whenever possible. "Abigail?" she called softly, as if afraid I might disappear like smoke. I straightened, pulling off my gardening gloves. "Alexis, this is unexpected." She stood at the gate, uncertainty written across her features. "I hope you don't mind me just showing up. I tried calling Kevin to get your number and he told me some things. I wanted to hear your side." I studied her face, looking for signs of judgment or manipulation, but found only genuine concern. "What did Kevin tell you? That you'd had some kind of breakdown? That you'd moved out without warning and were refusing to speak to family? He made it sound like you were—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Like you were having a mental health crisis." I felt the familiar anger rise in my chest, but it was different now. Cleaner, more focused. "And what do you think?" Alexis looked around the garden, taking in the freshly planted flowers, the neatly trimmed hedges, the peaceful order I'd created. "I think you look better than you have in years. I think this place suits you." Something in my chest loosened. "Would you like some coffee?" We sat in my small kitchen, the afternoon light painting geometric patterns on the table between us. Alexis held her mug with both hands, as if drawing warmth from it, and listened while I told her the truth. I left nothing out. The casual cruelty, the financial exploitation, the planning session I'd overheard that shattered my remaining illusions about my son's character. "Jesus," she said when I finished. "I knew Kevin could be calculating, but I didn't think he'd treat you like that. How did you know to find me here? I remember Dad talking about this place. He was proud of buying it, said it was your safety net if anything ever happened to him." She smiled sadly. "He worried about you, you know. Said you were too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. He was right. Maybe. Or maybe you just expected the same kindness from others that you gave freely. That's not a character flaw, Abigail." I looked at this young woman who had every reason to resent me. I'd married her father when she was still adjusting to her parents' divorce, but who had driven 6 hours from Seattle to check on my well-being. The generosity of it made my throat tight. "Why did you come, really?" Alexis was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "Because Dad loved you. Because in the years before he died, you made him happier than I'd ever seen him. And because—" She paused, meeting my eyes. "Because Kevin called me asking if I knew about any money Dad might have left you. He seemed very interested in your financial situation." The coffee turned to acid in my mouth. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, because I don't know anything specific. But the way he asked, it wasn't concern for your welfare. It was something else." I set down my mug with careful precision. "What exactly did he say?" "He wanted to know if Dad had ever mentioned other accounts, if there might be assets you weren't aware of. He said he was worried you might be taken advantage of by financial advisors or scam artists." He painted himself as the protective son looking out for his naive mother. The rage that filled me was white-hot and clarifying. Kevin wasn't content with having driven me away. He was still calculating angles, still looking for ways to benefit from our relationship. The fact that he would try to manipulate Alexis into helping him access my finances was breathtakingly audacious. "There's something else," Alexis said quietly. "When I wouldn't give him information, he got angry. Said you'd always been Harold's favorite, that you'd probably manipulated him into leaving you more than you deserved." I closed my eyes, feeling the last fragile thread of maternal affection snap cleanly in two. Kevin hadn't just been callous or thoughtless. He'd been calculating from the beginning, probably from the moment Harold died. Every kindness, every gesture of filial duty had been an investment in what he thought was coming to him. "Abigail, are you okay?" I opened my eyes and found Alexis watching me with concern. "I'm fine. I'm better than fine, actually. Your visit has been very illuminating." "What are you going to do?" What was I going to do? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. For weeks I'd been reactive, responding to Kevin's betrayal, protecting myself, establishing boundaries. But I'd been thinking too small, too defensively. "I'm going to live my life," I said finally. "I'm going to stop letting other people dictate my worth." and I'm going to make sure Kevin understands exactly what he's thrown away." Alexis smiled, the first real smile I'd seen since she arrived. "Good. Dad would be proud of you." After she left, promising to stay in touch and to visit again soon, I sat in the growing dusk and considered my options. Kevin thought he could manipulate Alexis into helping him access my money. He thought I was a naive old woman who needed protection from financial predators. He thought he could paint my independence as a mental breakdown and position himself as the concerned son. He had underestimated me completely. I went to the bedroom and pulled out the wooden box that contained Harold's letters from our courtship. Hidden in the false bottom, beneath the faded envelopes, was something Kevin would never think to look for. Something Harold had insisted I keep despite my protests. The deed to the house we'd lived in together for 37 years. Harold had quietly transferred ownership to me 5 years before his death, part of his careful estate planning. Kevin thought he was living in his childhood home, the house that would naturally pass to him as the surviving son. He had no idea he was living in my house, paying utilities on my property, making improvements to my real estate. I'd never mentioned it because it had seemed unnecessary, even unkind. Kevin loved that house, had grown up there, had natural emotional claims to it. I'd assumed I'd live out my days there and leave it to him in my will. But assumptions, I'd learned, were dangerous things. I picked up the phone and dialed James Foster's number. "James, it's Abigail. I need to discuss some property matters." "Of course. What can I help you with?" "The house on Maple Street, the one Kevin is living in. I'd like to explore my options regarding the current occupancy." A pause. "Abigail, are you certain about this direction?" "I'm certain that my son believes he can manipulate my stepdaughter into accessing my financial information. I'm certain that he's telling people I'm having a mental breakdown rather than admitting he drove me away with his greed. I'm certain that he still sees me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected." "I see. What did you have in mind?" "I'd like to understand the legal requirements for evicting tenants who haven't paid rent." Another pause, longer this time. "Abigail, if Kevin doesn't know you own the house—" "He doesn't. Harold handled all the paperwork, and Kevin never asked questions about property ownership. He assumed he was living in his father's house. This could be complicated. Family relationships aside, you'd be within your legal rights, but—" "James, I'm not asking for advice about family relationships. I'm asking about property law. In that case, if there's no formal lease agreement and no rent being paid, you could issue a 30-day notice to vacate. After that, if they don't leave voluntarily, you'd need to file for formal eviction. And if I wanted to simply sell the property, you could do that at any time, though you'd still need to give proper notice to the current occupants." I looked out the kitchen window at the apple trees, heavy with fruit that was finally ready for harvest. The evening light caught the red apples like small lanterns, beautiful and perfect, and exactly where they belonged. "Thank you, James. I'll be in touch soon." I hung up and sat in the gathering darkness, feeling something settle in my chest like a key turning in a lock. Kevin wanted to play games with my security, my reputation, my relationships. He wanted to treat me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Tomorrow, he would learn what it felt like to have his own security questioned. Tomorrow, he would discover that the house he'd been so eager to expand by removing me from it didn't belong to him at all. Tomorrow, Kevin would learn the true cost of calling his mother a burden. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail to ensure there could be no question about Kevin receiving it. I had spent 3 days crafting the language with James's help, making sure every word was legally precise and emotionally devastating. Notice to quit and vacate premises. 2. Kevin Carter and Louise Carter and all other occupants of 428 Maple Street. You are hereby notified to quit and deliver up possession of the above-described premises to Abigail Maloney, the owner thereof, within 30 days. I imagined Kevin's face as he read those words, Abigail Maloney, the owner thereof, and felt a satisfaction so pure it was almost spiritual. The phone started ringing within an hour. I was in the garden, harvesting the last of the late tomatoes, when I heard it through the open kitchen window. I let it ring 10 times before walking inside, wiping my hands on my apron with deliberate slowness. "Hello?" What the hell is this? Kevin's voice was strangled with disbelief and rage. This notice. It says you own the house. That's impossible. Good morning, Kevin. I trust you received the legal documents? This is some kind of mistake. Dad left me that house. I've been living there for 15 years since college. It's my house. Actually, it's my house. Your father transferred ownership to me in 2020, part of his estate planning. I have the deed if you'd like to see it. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have fainted. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. You're lying. I'm not. James Foster has all the documentation if you'd like to verify it through your attorney. Though I suppose you'll need to find somewhere else to practice law first, since your current home office will be unavailable in 30 days. You can't do this. You can't just throw your own family onto the streets. I laughed, and the sound surprised me with its lightness. I'm not throwing anyone onto the streets, Kevin. I'm simply reclaiming my property from tenants who haven't been paying rent. Tenants who, if I recall correctly, found me to be too much of a burden to continue housing. You misunderstood what you heard. Did I? Let me refresh your memory. You said, and I quote, "My mother? I can't keep carrying her. She's a burden." Louise suggested assisted living so you could have more space. You both laughed about converting my room into a home office. You were serious enough to research facilities. Serious enough to discuss my financial situation with my stepdaughter, trying to get information about assets you thought you might access. Serious enough to tell people I'm having a mental breakdown rather than admit you drove me away with your greed. Another long silence. I could hear Louise's voice in the background, shrill and demanding explanations. Their perfect life was crumbling in real time, and I found I had no sympathy left to offer. Mother, please. Let's sit down and talk about this rationally. There has to be a way to work this out. There is. You have 30 days to find alternative housing. I'm putting the house on the market. You're selling it? His voice cracked like a teenager's. That house is my history. I grew up there. It's where Dad and I played catch in the backyard, where you taught me to ride a bike. You can't just sell my childhood. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Your childhood memories aren't being sold, Kevin. The building is. And since you found it so easy to erase my 43 years of memories when you decided I was inconvenient, I'm sure you'll adjust. What do you want? Money? A formal apology? Tell me what it will take to fix this. It can't be fixed, Kevin. You can't unbake a cake, and you can't unfeel the moment when your child looks at you and sees only a financial burden. You meant exactly what you said. The only thing you regret is that I heard it. Louise had apparently wrestled the phone away from Kevin because suddenly her voice was hissing in my ear. You vindictive old bitch. You're destroying our family out of spite. Louise, I said calmly, I'm simply making the same kinds of practical decisions you and Kevin made about me. I'm thinking about what's best for everyone, just like you taught me. You can't throw us out. We have children. Where are we supposed to go? I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're both intelligent, capable adults with good jobs. I have complete faith in your ability to provide for your family without depending on my charity. Your charity? We never asked for charity. We opened our home to you. You opened my home to me and charged me rent. There's a difference. Kevin had regained control of the phone. Mother, the girls need stability. Emma's in 3rd grade. Cynthia just started kindergarten. You can't uproot them in the middle of the school year. I'm not uprooting anyone. You are. You made the choice to treat me as disposable, so now you get to experience what disposal feels like. This isn't you talking. This isn't who you are. You're right. The woman you knew would have apologized by now, would have backed down and found a way to make everyone else comfortable at her own expense. But she's gone, Kevin. You killed her when you called her a burden. I could hear him crying now, actual tears, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Where was this emotion when he was planning my exile? Where were these tears when he was laughing about converting my room? Please, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was terrible. Just give me a chance to make this right. Kevin, do you know what's in the safe behind the wall in your bedroom? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What safe? The one your father installed behind the master bedroom closet. The one hidden behind the false panel he built himself. I don't know what you're talking about. Look for it. When you find it, call me." I hung up and walked back to the garden, leaving him with that puzzle to solve. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face as I continued harvesting tomatoes, each red fruit a small victory against the coming winter. The phone rang again 2 hours later. I found it. Kevin's voice was barely audible. And what was inside? Letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to you. From whom? From me. From when I was in college and law school, and when I first started practicing. Thank you notes. Birthday cards. Letters telling you how grateful I was for everything you'd done for me. I closed my eyes, remembering. Harold had saved them all. Every scrap of paper that showed Kevin's love and gratitude. He'd told me once that someday I might need reminding of the good times, of the boy Kevin had been before ambition and entitlement had hardened his heart. "There's something else," Kevin continued, his voice breaking. "A letter from Dad. Addressed to both of us. Read it. My dearest Abigail and Kevin," he began, then stopped. I can't read this." "Read it, Kevin." He cleared his throat and began again. "My dearest Abigail and Kevin. If you're reading this, then something has gone wrong between you, and Abigail has been forced to reveal the safe I hoped she'd never need to open. Kevin, your mother is the strongest, most generous woman I've ever known. She raised you to be better than this. Abigail, you are not now, nor have you ever been a burden to anyone who truly loves you. You are a gift. Both of you. Remember who you used to be to each other. Remember that love isn't a transaction, and family isn't a business arrangement. Kevin, your mother deserves your respect, not your resentment. Abigail, you deserve a son who sees your worth, not your weakness. I pray you find your way back to each other, but I understand if some bridges burn too completely to rebuild. All my love, Harold." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of a dead man's wisdom and a living woman's pain. "Mom," Kevin whispered, using a name he hadn't called me in years. "I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the golden light of late afternoon, and felt the last of my anger drain away. What remained wasn't forgiveness. That would take time, if it came at all. But something else. Peace, maybe. Or simply the satisfaction of justice served cold and complete. I know you are, Kevin. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase the casual cruelty or the calculated exploitation. Sorry is just a word you use when the consequences finally arrive. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to fix this. You can find somewhere else to live. You can learn to stand on your own without my support. You can teach your daughters that love isn't conditional on convenience. And then maybe someday we can talk about whether there's anything left to salvage between us. But not today, Kevin. Today, you have 28 days to find a new place to live. 2 months later, I was standing in my empty house on Maple Street, watching the moving trucks carry away the last of Kevin's belongings. The buyers, a young couple with a toddler, would take possession next week. They'd fallen in love with the garden, with the afternoon light in the kitchen, with the sense of history embedded in the walls. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, my footsteps echoing in spaces that had held 40 years of my life. In the master bedroom, the false panel behind the closet hung open, the safe empty now except for dust and memories. Outside, Kevin loaded the last box into his rental truck. He looked older, worn down by 2 months of apartment hunting and mortgage applications, and the slow realization that the safety net he'd taken for granted was gone forever. He walked over to where I stood in the driveway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Mom," he said quietly, "the house sold for more than I thought it would. It's a good neighborhood. Good bones. What will you do now?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw flashes of the boy he'd been, the young man I'd been proud of, buried beneath the stranger he'd become. "I'm going to travel. I'm thinking about taking dance lessons. I might learn to paint. Will you let us know where you are? The girls ask about you? I'll send postcards," I said. "And when you're ready to have a conversation about respect instead of convenience, You have my number." He nodded, tears threatening. "I love you, Mom. I know I've got no right to say that anymore, but I do. I love you too, Kevin. That's why this hurts so much." He drove away without looking back, his truck disappearing around the corner toward whatever uncertain future awaited him. I stood in the driveway until the sound of his engine faded, then walked to my car and drove home to Millbrook. The dance studio was only 20 minutes away. According to their website, they offered classes for seniors every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The instructor's name was Carlos, a widower who'd started dancing after his wife's death as a way to remember joy. I had called that morning and registered for the beginner's class. At 63, I was finally ready to learn something new.